November 14, 1965. Landing Zone X-ray, Ia Drang Valley, Central Highlands of South Vietnam. 10:48 in the morning. The pen barely moved as First Lieutenant James Riley wrote in his field notebook, his hands still shaking from the fight that had started just after the helicopters left. The rifle in my hands just saved my life, but I saw 3 men die today because their rifles would not fire. Through the tall elephant grass and thick jungle with 3 layers of trees, about 14 miles west of Plamy Camp, American soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Division Airmobile had just faced their first big battle against the regular North Vietnamese Army. 450 men of Lieutenant Colonel Harold Moore's 1st Battalion, 7th Cavalry had been dropped by helicopter into a clearing at the base of the Chu Pong Massif. Within minutes of landing, they had made contact with soldiers from the North Vietnamese Army's 66th Regiment. What would turn into a 3-day battle had begun. The new M16 rifle, rushed into production and sent to Vietnam with promises of amazing firepower, worked perfectly for some soldiers. For others, it failed badly. No one knew that this moment would start one of the worst equipment failures in American military history, a total loss of trust between soldiers and their main weapon that would cost hundreds of lives before Congress forced urgent fixes. The math of this disaster was not written in battle plans, but in jam rates, powder rules, and chrome plating decisions that put saving money ahead of keeping soldiers alive. The problem started not in the jungles of Vietnam, but in the offices of the Pentagon and the factories of American defense companies. The weapon that became the M16 started as the Armalite AR-15, designed in the late 1950s by Eugene Stoner. Born in 1922, Stoner had been a Marine in the South Pacific during World War II, and later worked as a machinist and engineer. His new way of designing rifles challenged every idea about military weapons. The AR-15 was first shown at Fort Benning, Georgia in May 1957. This light rifle, weighing just 6.37 pounds compared to the M14's 9.2 pounds, fired a small 5.56 mm bullet at very high speed. The cartridge itself was based on the commercial 223 Remington round and pushed a 55-grain bullet at over 3,000 feet per second. Early tests with Special Forces units in 1962 showed remarkable results. The rifle's light recoil let soldiers stay on target even when firing full automatic high ammo. Capacity meant soldiers could carry 300 rounds that weighed about the same as 180 rounds of 7.62 mm for the M14. The high-speed round caused terrible wounds, and so it was well suited for the close-up jungle fighting in Southeast Asia. Air Force security police units picked up the rifle and said it worked great. But between those good early tests and full use in the field, a string of choices turned a new weapon into a death trap. In January 1963, Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara decided the AR-15 was better than the M14, and he stopped M14 production. In November 1963, he approved orders for 85,000 XM16E1s. Even though some Army leaders still wanted the heavier M14 production started in March 1964. The choice was driven by cost, by the urgent need for guns for Vietnam, and by McNamara's trust in systems analysis and new technology over old military ways. However, the gun McNamara ordered was not the same rifle that had done so well in early testing. The changes started with the ammo. Eugene Stoner had designed the AR-15 to fire cartridges loaded with IMR 4475, a stick powder, made by DuPont. This powder made specific pressures and gave a cyclic rate of fire near 800 rounds per minute. That mix had been carefully made to work with the rifle's direct gas impingement system, where propellant gases are sent back into the bolt carrier to cycle the action. In March 1964, DuPont told the Army it could not mass-produce IMR 4475 to the needed specs and timeline. The powder worked perfectly in small controlled batches, giving steady speeds and pressures but making millions. of rounds with the same quality turned out to be impossible. The extruded stick powder needed tight control of temperature, humidity, and cutting steps. Even small differences between batches could change chamber pressure and bullet speed. The Army needed millions of rounds right away for Vietnam, but DuPont could not deliver. The Army had to find another option fast. Olin Matthiessen stepped forward with WC-846, a ball propellant already used for 7.62x 51mm NATO ammo ball powder used a totally different making process. The nitrocellulose was dissolved in solvents formed into tiny spheres, and then hardened. This way was faster, more steady, and much easier to make in huge amounts. A batch of WC-846 could be made in 40 hours instead of 2 weeks for IMR 4475. More important, Olin Matthiessen could promise the huge deliveries the Army needed. The Army and Olin both knew WC-846 burned differently than IMR 4475. Ball powder made higher peak pressures and kept pressure higher longer as the bullet moved down the barrel. That made higher port pressure at the gas port. More gas was forced back through the gas tube into the bolt carrier. The action cycled harder, and the cyclic rate rose from about 800 rounds per minute to between 850 and 1,000 rounds per minute. Even worse, WC-846 used calcium carbonate as a stabilizer and coating. The calcium carbonate helped control burn rate, but left much more fouling than IMR 4475 in old rifle designs with gas pistons. This extra fouling went into the piston and could be cleaned from outside the action. But the M16 used direct gas impingement. Every bit of that calcium carbonate residue was blown straight back into the bolt carrier, the bolt, and worst of all, the chamber with every shot. No one did wide testing of the M16 with WC-846 before the swap. The rifle had been tested and approved with IMR 4475, but the ammo change was treated like a simple swap. Not a major change. Army acceptance. Tests kept using leftover IMR 4475 loaded ammo, even as millions of rounds of WC-846 were being made and shipped. The second critical choice involved chrome plating. Eugene Stoner and the engineers who built the rifle strongly urged chrome plating. The chamber and bore. This was not new. Chrome plating had been used in artillery barrels since World War I, and in aircraft machine guns during World War II. The process put a thin layer of chromium on the steel to make a hard, rust-resistant surface. Chrome plating would protect the rifle from corrosion in Vietnam's wet jungle and would help stop cartridge cases from sticking in the chamber when they were pulled out. The United States military already knew about tropical corrosion from the Pacific in World War II. Weapons that worked fine in mild climates had rusted fast in island humidity. Chrome plating had been identified as the fix decades earlier. The Army rejected this advice. Chrome plating added cost and slowed production. Each chamber had to be carefully prepared, plated in an electroplating bath, and then checked. The extra steps lengthened the manufacturing timeline. More important, Army ordnance traditionalists worried chrome plating would hurt accuracy. Some target shooters believed chrome-plated barrels were less accurate than bare steel, though tests never proved this for military accuracy. The decision was made to make rifles without chrome-plated chambers, despite warnings from the maker. The Army said the cost was too high, though no official papers show the exact savings per rifle. Army ordnance believed that careful maintenance would prevent corrosion. That belief proved catastrophically wrong in Vietnam's climate and in combat. The third decision would be just as catastrophic. Colt had advertised the M16 as needing very little maintenance, far less than the M14. This was true when firing ammunition loaded with IMR 4475 under controlled conditions. Marketing. The rifle was called nearly self-cleaning in some early papers and briefings, and the Army took that claim as true and did not give soldiers enough cleaning gear or training before they went to Vietnam. Soldiers got their new M16s with almost no cleaning kits, no real instructions on how to care for them, and often with clear statements that the rifle needed little or no cleaning. Many were told the weapon was self-cleaning, and that trying to clean it wrong could damage it. This advice would be deadly when mixed with the heavy fouling from WC-846 powder and the lack of chrome plating in the chamber. The fourth change made the growing disaster worse. The original AR-15 had no forward assist apart to push the bolt fully forward if it would not close. Eugene Stoner left this out on purpose, saying if the bolt would not close, something was wrong and the soldier should clear it. Not force it, Army Ordnance pushed to add a forward assist, saying soldiers needed a way to force the bolt into battery. This small change later showed how deep the problems were. Soldiers used the forward assist to try to close bolts on chambers that were already too fouled to work. The first M16s reached Vietnam in early 1965. Initial issue went to elite units, Special Forces Airborne, and the 1st Cavalry Division. These early units mostly used remaining IMR 4475 ammo and included soldiers who had better training and who cleaned their weapons carefully. Their reports were mostly positive. Lieutenant Colonel Harold Moores, 1st Battalion 7th Cavalry, carried M16s into the Ia Drang Valley in November 1965. Moore, a West Point grad and Korean War veteran, led 450 men in 4 rifle companies. They flew in on 16 UH-1D Huey helicopters, landing in waves at Landing Zone X. The landing zone was a clearing about 100 yards wide at the east base of the Chu Pong Massif, a mountain that rose to 4,400 feet and marked the border with Cambodia. Within 15 minutes of the first helicopter landing Moores, troops made contact with North Vietnamese forces. What followed was a desperate 3-day battle against elements of 3 regiments. North Vietnamese regiments, maybe 2,000 enemy soldiers. The fighting was often at point-blank range, and sometimes hand-to-hand. The North Vietnamese launched human wave attacks. American soldiers fired their M16s on full automatic burning through magazine after magazine. In that first big fight between American and North Vietnamese regular forces, the M16 worked very well for most soldiers. The rifle's high rate of fire and light ammo let troops carry far more rounds than they could with M14s. Lieutenant Colonel Moore ordered his men to carry as much ammo as they could. Many soldiers carried 300 to 400 rounds. In the close-up, desperate fighting at Ia Drang, this ammo amount proved decisive. American firepower, along with artillery and airstrikes, stopped the North Vietnamese from overrunning the landing zone. Sergeant Ernie Savage, who fought in the battle, later said, "I did not run out of ammunition. I had about 30 magazines in my pack, and no problems with the M16. Savage's platoon held an important spot on the perimeter. The whole battle. The M16s worked as they should, but Ia Drang was the best case for the rifle. These were well-trained soldiers in an elite airmobile division. They had better instruction on the new rifle than regular infantry units would get later. They kept their weapons clean. Most important, many of the rifles at Ia Drang were still using ammo loaded with IMR 4475 powder, the propellant the rifle was made to use. The guns were fairly new, with chambers not yet corroded. The chaos of battle and the success of the fight hid early warning signs of problems that would show up months later. As 1966 went on, and hundreds of thousands of M16s poured into Vietnam, loaded only with WC-846 ammo, and sent to regular infantry units with little training, the crisis began. By mid-1966, reports started coming back from Vietnam that the M16 was failing at catastrophic rates. Soldiers wrote desperate letters home saying their rifles jammed after just a few shots. Officers filed official complaints, saying their men had lost trust in their main weapon. Medical evacuation helicopters brought back wounded soldiers who said their rifles had failed when they needed them most. The failures followed a deadly pattern. After firing 10 to 20 rounds, especially on full automatic, the rifle would fail to pull out the spent cartridge. The malfunction became painfully familiar to soldiers all over Vietnam. The soldier would pull the trigger. The rifle would fire. The action would cycle. The bolt carrier moved back from gas pressure. The extractor tried to pull the spent cartridge from the chamber, but it stuck, held by corroded chamber walls and sealed by powder residue. The extractor, a small hook-shaped piece of spring steel, pulled on the brass rim. The soft brass bent under pressure. The extractor tore the rim off, leaving the cartridge body stuck in the chamber. The bolt carrier would cycle back, ejecting only the torn rim. A new round would be pushed forward by the bolt. But the bolt could not close. The chamber still had the stuck cartridge. The new round would jam against it. The action was completely locked. The soldier would pull the trigger and hear only a click. The hammer hit the firing pin, but it could not reach the primer because the bolt was not fully closed. At this point, the rifle could not work at all. No amount of moving the charging handle or using the forward assist would fix it. The only way to clear this jam was to put a cleaning rod down the barrel from the muzzle and push the stuck case backward, out of the chamber. This meant removing the magazine, locking the bolt back, putting a rod down the 20-inch barrel, and forcefully driving the case out through the ejection port. But soldiers had not been given cleaning rods. The rifle had been called self-cleaning, and needing very little cleaning kits when they existed at all, were usually kept at base camps, not carried on patrol. Even if a soldier had a cleaning rod doing this, fix under fire was almost impossible. It needed both hands, and at least 30 seconds even for a trained soldier, and left him unable to defend himself. In a firefight where the enemy might be 10 feet away in thick jungle, 30 seconds without a working gun was a death sentence. Marine Corporal John Stevens wrote home in June 1966, "Out of 40 rounds I fired, my rifle jammed about 10 times. I pack as many grenades as I can, plus a bayonet and K-bar jungle knife, so I will have something to fight with. If you can please send me a bore rod and a 1 1/4 inch paintbrush, I need it. Our rifles are getting a lot of guys killed because they jam so easily." The desperation in letters like this shows a soldier's worst fear. Fighting in dense jungle where the enemy could be 5 feet away, where contact happened with no warning, and survival depended on immediate heavy firepower, only to find your rifle fires 5 rounds and then becomes a useless club. October 1966. The commanding officer of 1st Battalion, 2nd Infantry, 1st Infantry Division filed an official report. The new XM16E1 rifles are malfunctioning so much that confidence is gone. His battalion had lost men in firefights when their rifles failed. Troops began picking up enemy AK-47s from dead North Vietnamese soldiers, weapons they knew would fire even when covered in mud. The AK-47 became the M16's terrible opposite. Designed in the Soviet Union by Mikhail Kalashnikov and adopted in 1947, the AK used a very different system. The AK had a long stroke, gas piston. When the rifle fired, gas was taken from the barrel through a gas port, but instead of being sent back into the bolt carrier like the M16, the gas pushed a long piston separate from the bolt carrier. The piston then pushed the bolt carrier backward. Then the piston moved forward while the bolt carrier kept cycling. This kept propellant gas and fouling out of the action. All the burning residue stayed in the gas tube and piston, and did not go into the bolt or chamber. The AK was also made with loose-fit parts, so it worked when dirty, wet, or rusty. The bolt had extra space inside the receiver so dirt and debris could fall out through gaps. The curved magazine fed rounds even when dented or dirty. Every part of the AK put reliability over precision. Mikhail Kalashnikov designed the gun from his time as a Soviet tank commander in World War II. He knew soldiers in combat could not keep weapons clean, so he built a rifle that worked even when mistreated. North Vietnamese and Viet Cong fighters often kept their AK-47s poorly or not at all. The weapons were stored in underground caches where they sat in water, mud, and humidity for months, carried through rivers, dropped in rice paddies, and buried when units retreated. The guns still worked. An AK could be pulled from a muddy stream. The bolt cycled once to clear water, and the weapon would fire. American soldiers saw the difference right away. We found a case that had been buried in mud, dropped in rivers, left in the jungle. For weeks, wrote Sergeant William Rodriguez. We picked them up, pulled the bolt back, and they fired. Our M16s jammed if you looked at them wrong. The contrast became a bitter joke among infantry units. The enemy had better rifles than we did. The market for captured AK-47s grew. Officially carrying enemy weapons was against the rules. American ammo did not fit the AK, and using enemy guns risked friendly fire. But unofficially, many squad leaders let, or even told men to carry captured AKs. Some soldiers carried both an M16 and an AK using the American rifle until it jammed, then switching to the Soviet gun. A working AK was better than a jammed M16. Soldiers understood that, even if Army rules did not. The first official recognition of the crisis came too slowly. Reports of malfunctions reached General William Westmoreland, commander of Military Assistance Command, Vietnam. Westmoreland was in a tough spot. He had personally requested 100,000 M16s for Vietnam and praised the rifle as perfect for jungle fighting. He had visited units at Ia Drang right after the battle and heard good reports about the gun. He thought the rifle was a big improvement over the M14 for the kind of fighting American forces faced in Southeast Asia. Yet soldiers under his command were writing home that the M16 was getting them killed. The complaints could not be ignored, but admitting the problem meant admitting a huge failure in getting the right weapons. In December 1966, the Marine Corps did a formal survey of 2nd Battalion 9th Marines after a series of fights where rifle failures caused casualties. The battalion had been in Operation Prairie heavy fighting in the demilitarized zone near the North Vietnamese border. The survey was shocking. About 80% of troops said they had stoppages during combat. Many said their rifles jammed after fewer than 10 rounds. Several Marines said they had been hurt or seen others killed because rifles failed. Some said they fired only 3 or 4 rounds before the weapon completely failed. The survey listed the types of malfunctions. Failure to extract was the most common, making up 80% of stoppages. Failure to feed where a new cartridge would not go into the chamber properly made up most of the rest. Failure to fire where the firing pin did not hit. The primer was rare. The extraction failures followed the now familiar pattern. The rifle would fire several rounds. Then a cartridge would stick in the chamber. The extractor would tear the rim. The rifle would be totally jammed. The survey gave the most damning proof yet. The I Court Committee investigation later confirmed that one Marine corporal had been killed while running up and down his squad line trying to unjam other Marines' rifles with his cleaning rod. He was the only member of his squad who had gotten a cleaning rod, apparently by trading with another unit. During a firefight, several Marines in the squad had extraction failures at the same time. The corporal moved from place to place using his cleaning rod to push stuck cases out of chambers while under fire. He was shot and killed while clearing a jam from another Marine's rifle. His own rifle, working properly, was found next to him. He had died trying to keep his squad in the fight. By early 1967, the stories were reaching the American public soldiers' letters home. Describing rifle failures began appearing in newspapers. One Marine officer wrote, "Senator Gaylord Nelson, the weapon has failed us at critical moments. As many as 60% of the rifles failed to work. I know of at least 2 Marines who died within 10 feet of the enemy with jammed rifles." Another Marine wrote simply, "You know what killed most of us? Our own rifles. The M16 families who had lost sons in Vietnam demanded to know if bad equipment had caused their deaths. On March 26, 1967, the Washington Daily News published a major story about M16 reliability problems with interviews of returning soldiers and excerpts from letters sent home from Vietnam. The article caused a political firestorm. How could American troops be sent into combat with defective rifles? Why had the problems not been found and fixed before wide deployment? Who was responsible for decisions that chose cost and production speed over soldier safety? The pressure on Congress became impossible to ignore. On May 3, 1967, Representative L. Mendel Rivers, chairman of the House Committee on Armed Services, set up a special subcommittee to investigate the M16 rifle program. Congressman Richard Eikard, Democrat of Missouri, was named chairman of the subcommittee. He was joined by Representative Speedy O. Long of Louisiana and Representative William G. Bray of Indiana. The I-Court Committee, as it became known, would carry out the most thorough investigation of a weapons program in congressional history. Over the next 5 months, the committee held hearings on May 15th, 16th, and 31st, June 21st, July 25th, 26th, and 27th, and August 8th, 9th, and 22nd. All hearings were at the Rayburn House Office Building in Washington. The committee interviewed hundreds of witnesses from combat soldiers recently back from Vietnam, to Army generals from Colt Engineers, to ammunition makers from Eugene. Stoner himself to Pentagon procurement officials. Testimony was given under oath. Documents were subpoenaed. Technical experts explained the ballistics and engineering involved. The committee looked at every part of the M16 program they reviewed. Procurement decisions going back to 1963. They analyzed test reports that had been filed and ignored. They studied engineering drawings and manufacturing specifications. They interviewed soldiers who survived firefights where their rifles failed. They examined weapons recovered from casualties. Rifles found next to dead Americans with stuck cases still in the chambers. The picture that emerged was devastating. Every decision that changed the reliable AR-15 into the failing M16 was documented. In detail, the switch from IMR 4475 to WC846 powder without proper testing. The rejection of chrome plating. Despite manufacturer recommendations. The failure to provide cleaning equipment or training. The misleading claims that the rifle was self-cleaning. The increased cyclic rate that made fouling worse. The quality control problems at Colt that let rifles be shipped with defective parts. Each failure was documented with technical data engineering reports and testimony from soldiers who paid the price. The committee found that many people had raised red flags about these problems before wide deployment. Colt engineers had protested the ammo change in writing. Company officials had clearly stated they could not guarantee weapon performance. With the new powder, Eugene Stoner had recommended chrome plating in his original design, and repeated this recommendation when the Army started large-scale procurement. Air Force officers who used the rifle with the right ammo and good care warned that cleaning gear and training were needed. Test reports showed more malfunctions with WC846 ammo. All these warnings were ignored or buried because leaders rushed to send rifles to Vietnam and wanted to cut costs. The worst finding was, who knew what and when Army Ordnance had test data showing WC846 raised malfunction rates. Colt had warned it could not guarantee rifle performance with WC846. They knew rifles without chrome plating would corrode in humid places. They knew soldiers were not getting enough training or cleaning gear. Yet deployment kept going month after month while soldiers died because their rifles failed. The testimony of returned combat veterans was especially powerful. Marine Corporal Thomas Martinez told of a firefight where his rifle jammed after the 3rd round. He used his jammed rifle as a club, got a bayonet wound, and watched his fire team leader die while trying to clear his jammed rifle. Private First Class David Chen described finding a dead American patrol All 7 men were killed, and all 7 M16s were jammed. Cleaning rods lay scattered around the bodies where the men had died trying to clear their weapons. Eugene Stoner explained his design view to the committee. The AR-15 was made as a complete system. The rifle, the ammunition, and the maintenance steps all had to work together. Changing the ammo without wide testing broke the system. He had recommended chrome plating because the direct gas impingement system would be open to corrosion. Without it, he never said the rifle was self-cleaning. That idea came from marketing and from people who did not understand the weapon. Ballistics experts explained the differences between IMR 4475 and WC 846. Ball powder made higher port pressures which sent more gas and residue into the action. The calcium carbonate in WC 846 left fouling that IMR 4475 did not. The higher cyclic rate made the problem worse. More rounds fired before a soldier could react to a jam made the problem worse. All of this could have been predicted. Some warnings had been made but ignored. Colt representatives testified that they had raised concerns about the ammo change. They wrote that they could not guarantee rifle performance with WC 846 and that the higher cyclic rate broke Army acceptance standards. The Army had allowed waivers to let the higher cyclic rate pass. Quality control inspectors testified about defects in rifles shipped to Vietnam. Bolt carriers with the wrong hardness that could crack under stress. Extractors with weak springs that would fail to pull stuck cases. They had rejected these rifles, but the rejections were overruled to meet production quotas. Financial testimony showed another side of the scandal. Using UC 846 saved money. Ball powder was cheaper and faster to make than stick powder. Olin Matheson made big profits from ammo contracts. Not chrome plating chambers saved production costs. The committee found no proof of outright corruption or bribery, but the close relationships between military buyers and contractors clearly influenced decisions. Cost and speed were put above combat effectiveness and soldier safety. By August 1967, the I-Court Committee had a strong case. The M16 failures were not just because of soldier mistakes or poor training. They were caused by systematic failures in buying, testing, and sending out weapons. Many officials and organizations shared blame. Army Ordnance approved the ammo change without proper testing. Army Material Command ignored the chrome plating recommendations. Training commands failed to teach proper. Maintenance Colt kept making rifles, even knowing about problems. Olin Matheson supplied ammo that did not work well with the rifle. Pentagon buyers focused on cost and speed over reliability. The committee's formal report, released October 19, 1967, had detailed findings and recommendations. The switch to ball powder ammo was the main cause of malfunctions. The lack of chrome plating in the chamber was the second cause. The failure to give proper cleaning equipment and training was the third main cause. The report called for immediate action. Chrome plate all M16 chambers and bores. Make improved ammo that fouls less. Give all troops carrying M16s full cleaning kits. Teach comprehensive maintenance training. Modify the rifle to lower the cyclic rate. Improve quality control in production. Create accountability for procurement decisions that affect soldier safety. The investigation caused so much political pressure that the Army could not keep doing things the old way. Changes started right away, even before the final report came out. The Army had already begun standardizing the improved XM16E1 as the M16A1. The XM16E1 was officially named the M16A1 on February 13, 1967, and adopted by the U.S. Army on February 28, 1967. Production of the improved rifle increased quickly through spring and summer. The M16A1 included key changes that fixed every major failure point. The chamber and bore were chrome-plated, stopping corrosion that had caused cases to stick. Chrome plating added extra steps but was essential. Each chamber was carefully prepared, cleaned, and electroplated with a thin, hard layer of chromium. The chrome created a smooth, corrosion-resistant surface. Spent cartridge cases no longer stuck in chambers. Extraction failures dropped a lot. A new buffer assembly slowed the cyclic rate back toward original specs. The buffer had weights and springs inside the buttstock that absorbed the bolt carrier's impact at the end of its rearward travel. The redesigned buffer used heavier weights and stiffer springs to slow action cycling. This cut the cyclic rate from over 900 rounds per minute back down to 750, 850 rounds per minute. The slower rate made the action less violent and reduced stress on all parts. The forward assist was made stronger and better, while Eugene Stoner had opposed it. Soldiers in the field found it useful when used correctly. The improved forward assist had a stronger part that could push harder to close a stubborn bolt. However, training stressed that the forward assist was for quietly chambering around, not for forcing a jammed action. Most important, the name change came with a full redo of training and maintenance. The self-cleaning myth was clearly and publicly proven false. Army training commands rewrote all instruction material. The new rules said the M16 must be cleaned often, especially in combat. Field Manual 23-9 was rewritten with clear cleaning steps. The new manual had step-by-step directions with photos and diagrams. It spelled out exactly how to take the rifle apart, what to clean, how to clean it, and how often soldiers were told to clean the chamber and bore after each firing session. The gas tube had to be cleaned weekly in combat. The bolt and bolt carrier needed to be taken apart, cleaned and oiled every day in the field. Simple comic book-style manuals were made that showed each step with pictures and very little text, so even troops with low reading skills or limited English could follow. The comic style used clear drawings, arrows, and simple words. A soldier who could not read technical manuals could follow the pictures. Full cleaning kits were made and sent across Vietnam. Each kit had everything needed for combat use. A 3-piece aluminum cleaning rod that screws together to reach the whole barrel, a bore brush with stiff bronze bristles to scrub the rifling, a chamber brush to clean chamber walls where cases stuck, pipe cleaners to clear the gas tube without taking the rifle fully apart, cotton patches to wipe surfaces clean, a small bottle of lubricating oil, a toothbrush-style brush for the bolt and bolt carrier. The whole kit fit in a small plastic case that could be carried in a cargo pocket or attached to load-bearing gear. Soldiers had to clean their rifles every day in combat, and even more often if they fired a lot. Squad leaders checked weapons regularly, and platoon sergeants did detailed inspections before and after missions. A dirty rifle was treated as a serious offense, just like other discipline failures. The message was clear. Your rifle will work if you take care of it. It will fail if you ignore it. New training programs made sure soldiers understood the M16 needed regular maintenance, just like any machine. The self-cleaning myth was fully disproven. In training classes, drill instructors taught correct cleaning steps and checked rifles carefully. Recruits spent hours learning to take apart clean and put together their rifles until they could do it fast and correctly, even in the dark. Before going to Vietnam, soldiers got extra training on keeping weapons working in tropical conditions. Most importantly, the ammo itself got better. In 1970, a new powder called WC-844 replaced WC-846 for 5.56 mm ammo. WC-844 had less calcium carbonate, so it made much less fouling. The combination of chrome plating and cleaner ammo fixed the extraction problem that had killed so many soldiers. The results were dramatic. By late 1967 and early 1968 units, with M16A1's proper cleaning kits and good training, reported big improvements in reliability. Malfunction rates dropped to levels equal to or better than other military rifles. The extraction problems that had caused so many jams became rare. Soldiers who had hated and feared the M16 began to trust it. The rifle's advantages could finally be used without the dangerous reliability issues. Its lightweight let soldiers carry more ammo or have less burden in combat. The high-capacity 30-round magazine gave sustained firepower in fights. Full automatic fire could be controlled for accurate suppressive fire. The powerful 5.56mm round was very effective at close range in jungle combat. With chrome-plated chambers, proper cleaning, and improved ammo, the M16A1 became the weapon it should have been from the start. In early 1968, the Army did thorough surveys of troops in Vietnam. The surveys were meant to see how much soldiers trusted the improved rifle, and to find any problems left. Results showed overwhelming satisfaction. The exact numbers changed depending on the questions, but approval ranged from 85% to 98% across different surveys. The February 1968 Department of Defense survey had the most detailed data. 2,100 soldiers and Marines were asked about their combat experience with the M16A1. Only 38 people, less than 2%, said they wanted a different weapon. Most reported the rifle worked reliably in combat. Most soldiers said they had no major problems in the last month of operations. When malfunctions happened, they were usually minor feeding problems that could be fixed quickly, not the deadly extraction failures that had killed men a year before. An August to September 1967 survey done while improvements were being made found 85% said the M16 worked well in combat. 87% said they liked the weapon. A January to February 1968 survey found 85% of troops wanted either the M16 or the XM135, a carbine version of the M16, for combat. The other 15% wanted different weapons, but this was normal. No weapon is perfect for everyone. The transformation was complete. A weapon once called a death trap, that soldiers had refused to carry, and that had caused deaths, had become trusted and effective. The same basic design, when used properly with the right ammo, chrome plating, cleaning equipment, and training, proved to be an excellent combat rifle. The human cost of the delay was huge. No one knows exactly how many American soldiers died because their M16s jammed in firefights. The number was certainly in the hundreds, maybe more. Each death could have been prevented. Each came from decisions made in offices thousands of miles away in Vietnam. Decisions that valued production speed and cost over soldier safety. Beyond deaths, thousands were wounded while fighting, with jammed rifles or using inferior weapons. The psychological cost was just as severe. Soldiers lost faith not just in their rifles, but in the army that sent them into combat with broken equipment. The damage went beyond individual tragedies. The M16 scandal became a symbol of what was wrong with the Vietnam War rush decisions: poor testing, putting numbers over people. Leaders disconnected from troops in the field. For many Americans, soldiers dying with jammed rifles showed the bigger failures of the war. The story did not end in 1967. The M16A1 was used for the rest of the Vietnam War with growing success. As soldiers learned how to maintain it and got used to its quirks, the rifle went from a danger to a legend. By the 1970s, veterans who had cursed the early M16s praised the M16A1. The rifle kept evolving through the M16A2, A3, A4, and finally the M4 carbine. It served American forces for over 50 years and armed armies worldwide. This change happened because the problems were found, investigated openly, and fixed properly. The M16 crisis shaped military buying rules for decades. The I-Court Committee set standards for Congress to watch over weapons programs. Before the M16 scandal, buying weapons was mostly an internal military matter. Congress gave money but rarely checked technical decisions about design, testing, or use. The Army and defense companies worked with little outside review. The I-Court investigation changed that soldiers' feedback became important. Before Vietnam, weapons were tested by experts and technical specialists. Soldiers who actually used the weapons in combat were rarely asked or ignored. The M16 crisis showed that soldiers in battle found problems labs missed. Their reports were not just complaints but critical data. The Army set up formal ways for troops to report equipment problems. After the war, the Army created the Product Quality Deficiency Report System so soldiers could officially report equipment failures. These reports were tracked, investigated, and could lead to engineering changes or adjustments in procurement. Similar systems were set up across all branches of the military. The soldier's voice in the field gained authority. It had never had before. Operational testing in real combat conditions became mandatory before any new weapon was fully deployed. The practice of adopting a weapon based only on lab tests and limited trials ended new rifles. Machine guns and other individual weapons now go through extensive operational testing by combat units in realistic conditions. Test units submit detailed reports on reliability, maintenance, and combat effectiveness. Procurement cannot move forward. Without positive operational test results, regulations were tightened to prevent the kinds of waivers and shortcuts that caused the M16 disaster. Any waiver to acceptance standards must now be documented, justified in writing, and approved at high levels. Casual waivers that allowed defective M16s to be shipped became much harder. Quality control inspections became stricter and independent. Previously, contractors mostly controlled their own quality control. After the M16 scandal, government inspectors had real authority to reject defective weapons. Overruling inspectors to meet quotas was forbidden. Manufacturing defects had to be fixed, not ignored. Most importantly, the fundamental lesson was learned. A weapon system must be tested as a complete system. Changing one component affects the whole system. Cost savings that reduce reliability are no savings at all when lives are lost. Contractor warnings about their own products should be heeded. Soldiers' complaints from the field should be investigated immediately, not buried in bureaucracy. In 1985, 20 years after Ia Drang, veterans of the 1st Cavalry Division held a reunion in Texas. Many brought their families to show them where they had served. Among the attendees were men who had fought with the original M16s at Ia Drang, and those who had struggled with jammed rifles in later battles. Former Staff Sergeant Michael Torres, who had carried an M16 through 13 months in Vietnam from 1967 to 68, spoke about the experience. The early M16 was a death trap. We knew it. We reported it. Nothing happened for a year. Men died while bureaucrats argued about powder specifications and chrome plating costs. But the M16A1 once they fixed it, that was a different weapon. Best rifle I ever carried. Light, accurate, reliable when you maintained it. It is what the original should have been. The lessons learned shaped not just rifles, but the entire military procurement system. Independent testing by soldiers in realistic conditions became standard. Congressional oversight of major weapons programs became routine. Contractor claims were verified rather than accepted. Today, the M16 is gradually being replaced by newer rifles. But the M16 family will remain in service for years. The rifle that nearly became America's worst procurement disaster instead became its most successful, precisely because the disaster was investigated, publicized, and corrected. The M16 crisis demonstrated several truths about military procurement and warfare. There are no shortcuts to reliability. Soldier feedback must be acted upon immediately. Transparency and accountability drive improvement. Good design can be ruined by bad implementation. Problems can be fixed if there is will to fix them. The soldiers who died because their M16s jammed in combat deserved better. They deserved rifles that had been properly tested. They deserved ammunition that worked with their weapons. They deserved chrome-plated chambers that would not corrode. They deserved cleaning equipment and training. They deserved leaders who would listen to their complaints and act immediately. The fact that later soldiers received all these things does not diminish the tragedy of those who died before the fixes were implemented. The M16 story became one of redemption, because the rifle that soldiers called a death trap in 1966 became the rifle they praised in 1970 and beyond. The weapon that symbolized Pentagon incompetence became proof that accountability and transparency could force improvement. But redemption never erases the original sin. The men who died with jammed M16s bought that redemption with their lives. The congressional investigation, the media exposure, the public outrage these forces drove change. They transformed a failing rifle into a reliable weapon. They reformed procurement procedures. They established accountability for equipment decisions. When soldiers were dying with jammed rifles and the military bureaucracy was slow to respond, it took Congress and the press to force action. The IORD Committee's investigation saved American lives by exposing the truth and demanding fixes. Today's soldiers carry weapons that work because soldiers in Vietnam carried weapons that failed. And because those failures were investigated publicly and corrected systematically, the M16 succeeded in the long run, not because it was perfectly designed, but because when it failed, the failure was not covered up or ignored. The rifle jammed, soldiers died. The news got out, Congress investigated, changes were made. The rifle worked. The men who carried M16s in Vietnam, particularly those who served in 1966 and 67 when the problems were worst, deserve recognition, not just for their combat service but for their persistence with defective equipment. They fought the enemy with rifles that too often would not fire. They improvised using grenades and captured weapons, and sheer determination. They reported problems up the chain of command. They wrote letters home describing the failures. Their complaints eventually triggered the investigation that fixed the system. The M16 failed American soldiers in Vietnam. Then America fixed the M16. That sequence of failure and correction defines both the tragedy and the triumph of the story. The tragedy was preventable. The triumph was earned. Together they taught lessons that shaped American military procurement for generations,